Jason. Here. Leroy. Here. Jerry.
Here.
Kevin. Here. I'm here. Approved July 11th agenda. Any changes or anything?
I don't have any.
Okay. Take a motion on the
Make
agenda.
that motion.
Okay, we've got a motion, we got support. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? June 27th minutes.
So is that correct, what's the limits with the $30?
No.
No.
I told you wrong. It's $40.50 what it current was, so that's why I have it on the agenda to consider the correction on that.
40 and 50?
Yeah. I made that mistake.
Okay, anything else?
The minutes will need to reflect the
Yes,
motion.
yes,
Maybe
because I told
30,
you wrong. I
45.
told you it was 30 and 45 cents, and it was in reality $40.50.
Okay, with that,
Motion to approve these minutes, huh?
okay, we've got a motion, we got support. I'll support that. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. We'll get one or two of these other ones in before we go quick. Approve appointment to zone commission. Elizabeth Leonard, Cindy Thole, Gary Holcomb.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, we have a motion, we have support. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Iowa DOT funding agreement. Amendment to amendment 323 STD 5008.
Yes, Mr. Chair, so the last couple of meetings, we've been bringing forth different agreements as they change funding sources and things like this. This is, now that that's all been done, the DOT would like to make an addendum to agreement memorializing all these other agreements that have been passed. So basically, so they have one document to refer to in the future, because it's been a lot of moving pieces. It's really nothing new than what's already approved.
Okay. Take a motion on that.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, we've got a motion, we have support.
I'll support.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Give authority to engineer to rent trucks.
Yes, Mr. Chair. So the trucks that we have on board for this next year probably won't arrive until after the winter season. So we've been looking around and trying to find trucks, and we do actually have a rental benefit that was part of our insurance policy. We were able to make contact with Greene County, and we went down and viewed their trucks. They have trucks that they were getting ready to send to auction, but they're willing to rent them to us for the coming season. They have two trucks. They'll come fully loaded with snow equipment, blades, sander, everything. They're Sterling trucks, which is similar to trucks we've run in the past. Cody's familiar with them. There really is no rental cost of how this works. So what we did was we looked at the DOT's rental rate for a truck, an hourly rate, and then we looked at how Ziegler would rent a smaller dump truck, and we tried to come up with the same proportions for a monthly rental rate. We're coming up with about $4,000 a month per truck, and they are agreeable to that as well, Greene County. So this motion before you is really to just grant me the authority to continue those types of discussions, negotiations, and to sign the rental agreements without having to take the time to bring them back and forth through insurance.
Okay. I would take a motion on that. Okay.
$4,050 per truck per month.
We've got a motion, do we have support?
Support.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Okay, 850. Approve resolution number 1.
Brian Young and Spencer are going to be on the phone call.
For these?
For those two.
Okay.
Welcome to the audio conferencing center. Please enter a conference ID followed by pound. You are now joining the meeting.
Good morning, Spencer.
Morning, Michelle.
The board is ready.
Okay. Everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, we've got Brian Young on as well. So, morning, everyone. Today what we have is the final drafts of the two resolutions that we briefly went through and looked at last time I was up there back in June. The resolution number one is the resolution by the board for construction of pipelines, electric lines, communication lines, underground service lines, really kind of a catch-all for all utilities except hazardous liquid pipelines. And that resolution lays out all the permitting and construction and compliance requirements for any utility company to install utility cross drainage district infrastructure. And that application is quite a bit shorter just because of a lot less of the requirements that come with those standard utility applications. We don't have all of the additional land restoration requirements from the Iowa code that hazardous pipelines have. In that resolution, it also states that the utility, by agreeing to the permit for the construction, they would reimburse the county for any and all costs borne by the county associated with that, whether it was engineering review of their utility application or inspection of their construction across the drainage district. That would all be reimbursable and paid by the utility installing it. Then resolution number two is essentially the same thing, except it's specific to hazardous liquid pipelines and has a lot more detail in it. Also lays out that the utility would actually be required to separate from the drainage district infrastructure as it exists now, and also account for any future improvements or changes so that that hazardous pipeline would not have to be moved in the future. The insurance requirements, I know we talked about last time, the limit of liability, I believe, was $1 million on the standard utility, and then on the hazardous pipeline utility, it was $10 million. The hazardous pipeline document also includes all of the requirements for land restoration that the Iowa code has with Chapter 9, as well as any mitigation plan. 199 Iowa Administrative Code, Chapter 9, as well as their agricultural impact mitigation plan. The hazardous pipeline application is also written as such that all costs would be reimbursable. However, that application includes a crossing fee that is due to be paid by the utility to the drainage district at the time of their permit issuance, and that fee is meant to capture those costs. However, it is written such that if the cost of the district exceeded that fee, any additional costs would also be reimbursable to the district for those requirements. So I know that was something we kind of went through these briefly last time. I just wanted to kind of update everyone on them. As we mentioned before, the hazardous pipeline one, we started with what the Iowa Drainage District Association has for a template. We added some language we wanted. Brian went through it, updated some of the language. The utility application is something that we actually, at ISG, have worked with. Some other counties developed something similar previously, has a lot of the same language. Again, we went through that, updated that language, and also had Brian review that. So I guess with that, I'll turn it over to Brian. I know he wanted to talk through these briefly, but Brian, do you want to talk through any of the legal aspects of this or your review on the documents?
Yeah, I can just touch on that briefly, Spencer. Thank you. Spencer's correct. I think we started with a template that we had already in existence, and then went ahead and just modified them and updated them. Some of it was just very basic, and some of it was more substantive. The things I'm always looking for are the items that be in compliance with all these other, regulations and state statutes. So I think they're informed at this point, for your consideration, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about them.
Anybody have any questions?
Not specific to these drainage district ones, would these be models that could be considered on a wider scale, apart from just drainage district facilities?
Yeah, so if the question is, could you modify these and use them as like say a template or a guide for, other, yes, I think you could. And that's kind of where we started, we took the IDDA version, which was a drainage district version, but went ahead and modified that. And then anytime, we're gonna draft legal documents, we're going to go and select language from other, items or other materials that might fit that situation. So it certainly could be a starting point for somebody else to use, for some purpose.
Okay.
And it's a public document, so there's nothing that prevents anybody from going and looking at this, I think, and saying, you know what, I kind of like the way they've done this. I might change it, use it for my purposes. I don't think there's anything that probably prohibits anybody from doing that.
Okay, anything else? Do we just go for a motion?
For each resolution.
Yeah. Okay, no other questions, we'll go for a motion on resolution number 1.
So moved.
Okay, we've got a motion for resolution 1, we have support. We have support. Okay, Ed,
Aye.
Jerry,
Aye.
Leroy,
Aye.
Jason,
Aye.
and I vote aye. Okay, resolution 2, Buffalo County Drainage District hazardous liquid pipeline construction.
Make a motion for its approval.
Okay, we've got a motion, we have support.
Support.
Okay, Jason,
Aye.
Leroy, Jerry,
Aye.
Ed,
Aye.
and I vote aye. Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Spencer.
Yeah, that's all I had this morning. Appreciate the board's time, and let us know if you have any other questions. Otherwise, we'll go from there. I guess the only thing I'll add is we did prepare an application form that goes along with these. So I know Brian has reviewed that, made some changes as well. So Rochelle should have that now, but I can work with you, Rochelle, to kind of develop a process for when and if any applications come in, how to handle that. So
Does it go through my office, engineer's office, what would be the best?
So what we had talked about, what I would recommend is, that, obviously Keith is aware of these now, and for him to have them on file and be aware of them, and then when he has any applications for construction and right of way come in, he can give that utility a heads up that, hey, there's also this other, requirement if you are crossing a drainage district that you need to meet, and then they would, coordinate through your office would be my recommendation, for that, and then, if you needed assistance in reviewing those, we could help you with that as well.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, everybody, have a nice day.
Yeah, you
Yep,
too.
thanks, bye.
Bye.
May I ask, when is this effective? Is there an effective date for this?
I'm assuming today, since it's board approved it, I'm assuming today.
Okay. Okay, we'll go back up to consider this one for homestead credit, military service property tax exemption applications.
All right, yep, Sharon has 3 applications that she received that she's recommending disallowance. This one, has a homestead, but to get that extra, homestead credit at 65. The wife is 65, but the husband is not, and she's not listed on the application, or on the deed. That's why she's recommending disallowance for that one,
Okay.
since wife's not on the or on the property. And then she had another one, he is receiving homestead and military credit, but he's applying for disabled veteran tax credit. So that means that all his taxes would be wiped out, but she's recommending disallowance of that because he's not 100% permanent disability. And then the last one is, there's one that military service, he was, the spouse was in the service, but but he wasn't in during a war, so there's certain criteria that he has to meet, and he doesn't meet any of their requirements, so she's recommending disallowance on that one as well.
So is this guy 100% disabled currently?
He's not permanent, is what she told me. He's getting, that's not permanent.
Did the VA people help fill this out?
I think Bussy did, yeah, I believe so. Because she talked to Bussy regarding this application.
And did Bobby say he wasn't?
He wasn't permanent, no, not 100% permanent.
Now, that first one, could they reapply when he's,
When he's 65, yes.
okay,
If her name was been on the property, it would have qualified for her name set on the property, so that's why she's just along better.
They have to be 100%.
Evidently. Or permanent.
So is this one just because he forgot to check a box?
He doesn't meet all those requirements. He was in the service, but he wasn't in the service during an active war. And then he wasn't in, he would have to meet those requirements and those boxes and,
You only have to meet one.
well, I said he wasn't in for 18 months, she said.
they do them all together one at a time?
Yeah.
Together.
You gotta do one at a time, or no?
All together.
All together.
I'll get to everybody sees them all, but okay, what are your wishes? Take a motion one word.
Motion to approve the recommended disallowances.
Okay, we've got a motion to allow the disallowances. We have support.
questions, I can get Sharon over here. And this one here, that's 65.
Yeah, that helps.
This one doesn't need.
With this one, could we do it until he gets off? I don't
I
know.
don't know.
This other one's like a minimum of 90 days is one of the options to check. And he's well within that window, so I guess I don't understand.
I'll get Sharon, I don't know if she's on it.
Because it only tells you to check one.
Well, the 65 is
That's,
just,
that's a given.
I don't understand the 100% disability. Because they're getting disability, they don't get this?
No, they're not 100% disabled. That's the way I take it.
100% is okay, but it's permanent, it's gotta be permanent.
And it's not.
Bucky says it's not permanent right now, it probably will be at some point, but right now it's not permanent.
If you grant it, can you take it away from them again or not?
Well, you know what, it's your call. I only take the application and make the recommendation.
Yeah.
So it's
No, I'm
entirely
just-
up to this board whether they wanna accept it or not.
I'm just thinking if he doesn't get to the 100%, can we take it away from him at that time?
Do you understand what this disabled vet homestead does?
Yeah,
Raises his taxes 100%.
yeah.
He's getting the homestead, he's getting the plus 65 exemption, and he's getting the military exemption. He's getting all those right now. Those would all go away and then his taxes would get raised with this disabled, that tax credit.
And then on the other one, which requirement didn't that guy meet where it says to check one of those boxes? Is it just
Yeah.
that he didn't check a box?
No. He's, the veteran is deceased and the wife is, or the widow is applying for it, which is totally fine as long as she's not remarried. But the days he served are not during an enumerated period of war. And so if you don't serve during an enumerated period of war, then you need to serve 18 months. He was only in like a year.
Well, looking at all the options that they gave to check you, one of those was only being a reservist for 90 days.
No. He wasn't in the reserve. This is not a very good form, it doesn't explain.
It just tells you to check one box.
Yeah. But he would have had to have served for 20 years, like in the Guard. But he wasn't,
Because that one here,
he wasn't in
Was
the
a member-
National Guard. He wasn't in the National Guard, he was in the
but that
Army.
only says 90 days, it says nothing.
But he
about-
had to have been activated for federal duty, excluding training. Who was activated, he wasn't
So all you had to do
activated.
was be an active member.
You had to be activated for federal duty, but he wasn't during a war.
It
Then
doesn't say
you'll-
anywhere in it that it has to be for a war.
Okay, he wasn't in the reserves or the National Guard. He was in the armed forces.
Did he get an honorable discharge? I mean, there's all those options on there.
Yeah.
I don't know,
He got an
nobody checked the box, so I didn't know if that's
No,
why.
we didn't check the box because none of those worked for him,
Okay.
so.
I would like to give the veterans every benefit they can, but I will second Jason's motion.
Yeah, because I know what the reasons, I agree, I know what the reasons are.
Tend to agree with that.
Yeah, and, maybe one other time, I've had an application that I recommend disallow. I take these applications all year, every year, but I rarely see one that we have to disallow. So, now we got 3 all at the same time, which very
Does
unusual.
Bucky help him fill these things out, or?
No.
No?
No, well, the disabled vet one, Craig was good at bringing in their paperwork when they got qualified. And so, but he brought the paperwork in himself. Bobby didn't bring him up, Craig didn't bring him up. And so then we went down, because it seems like the paperwork they get from the government is a little different. So we just went down and consulted with Bobby saying, does this one work? And she said, well, it's not permanent. She said, I know that. It'll probably come, but right now it's not permanent.
So once it does become permanent, then
Then he'll get a new paper
okay,
from the government.
okay. Okay, we've got a motion, we've got support. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, consider correction on mileage meal reimbursement for FY 23-24.
I told you, Ron, currently it was $40 for the meal and 50 cents per mile. So just, if you want to keep it the same, that's what it was. We just need a correction of water storage uses.
Okay, what do you guys think?
Did we make a motion to support? So do we have to?
We thought it was 45 and 30.
Yeah.
Do we have to?
When I talked to Nolan, he said just make a new motion to correct it, and then we will.
Okay, we've got a motion, do we have support?
I'll support that.
Okay, got support, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Pretty close to the department heads.
Here.
Sure. Got it in your hand. Okay, do we start with the papers? Reggie. What do you got going, Reggie?
Just normal, trying to keep ahead of it and pick up branches this time, and, some of the trees over there got some dead branches way up tall. I don't know if the guy needs to see about having them trimmed up, or just leave it until they come down on their own. I have no idea. As far as for talking to the city to paint the lines where the cars park, they haven't done any of their own yet, so I don't know if we do it every few years or how it works here.
I think they usually do it right before school starts.
Is that what, okay. Well, I figured I'd talk to them and
Yeah.
get it lined up.
Get on the list.
And, yeah, otherwise just normal things, I guess.
Okay.
Fix light bulbs and, or change light bulbs and whatnot. Whatever they tell me they need, I try and do it
I
without
was gonna say,
having to
I'm trying
hire.
to figure out how you fix light bulbs.
Well, change light bulbs, you know.
Okay, sounds good, thanks.
Well, we switched over to the new year, so we're getting all caught up on that. Working on new special assessments and some drainage statements here. Once Stacy gets back from her little vacation and the tax rolls going again.
Nolan?
We have a couple speedy trial demands, pending, so we'll have, trials scheduled pretty full the next few months. Same with, contested juvenile court hearings. There's definitely been an uptick in caseload in terms of overall work in juvenile court the past several months. And we are, again, starting to get busy in terms of arrests and things in jail and all that. paperwork, plans, and specifications for the HMA paving job that's going to go out to bid this fall, and the G20 bridge as well. In terms of projects that are actually active construction, the chip seal project there on Tyler Avenue, they completed the chipping yesterday. They'll be striping it next week. Salt shed is completed. We re-poured the floor in the salt shed ourselves in concrete. We're getting bids that were way too high for asphalt, so we just went and just did it in concrete. And we ended up with a new canvas top on that as well. The old top didn't survive the reconstruction. Project still did come in under budget though, with all the work that we self-performed. We're continuing the culvert work throughout the county as well. There is an opening on the Board of Adjustment. We did reappoint us for the Planning Commission, but we had a member of the Board of Adjustment who did not want to continue their term, so we'll be advertising for that position. On the fire claim, we finally have the forensic investigation of the trucks is set for this Friday. So once that's completed, we'll be able to work on demolition of the building, and we're working on plans and specs for that as well, to take that out to bid. That's what we have.
Okay, thank you. Kevin?
Well, 4th of July weekend was good. We had some special traffic enforcement going on. With the Governor's Traffic Safety Bureau, they granted so much money. And we got a $54,000 grant that pays for overtime. Now, we can use up to $54,000, so it's not 54. So we had a couple guys come out and did some special traffic enforcement during the 4th of July weekend. I've been on the road quite a bit. Had 2 guys within the past 3 weeks go to Iowa City to prison. I was in Des Moines yesterday. Hopefully I'll go back to Des Moines once this week, so one more time this week, so that's what's been going on.
Nick?
Well, it has rained just enough, the grass just keeps growing. So we're out, mowing, it seems like every time you go to a park, there's something wrong. So we're just having to fix some of that stuff. Doing some work for the WMAs, mowing some seedings, some thistles, and then we've got some trees that we've been trying to attend to and make sure they don't all die. Still working with DGR on the Willow Creek project. The last month, when the engineer was there at the board meeting, he still said we're hoping to start the project construction phase in September. So we'll hopefully still continue to stay on that schedule. I guess our Hunter's Ed class for the fall is scheduled for August 26th. It's a Saturday morning is the online field day portion of things. So if anybody that would be interested or of age needs to take it, that is when it's going to be.
Excuse me, what's the age for that?
You can take it at 11. It has to, your certificate does not become valid until you are 12.
Okay, Sharon?
2023 assessed values are final, the abstract and reconciliation has been sent into the state. And deadline to sign up for the plus 65 exemption was July 1, so that's still way down. Vanguard was here and visited all the elevators and the ethanol plants. So they'll be getting us some new assessed values for 2024 on the elevators and the ethanol plants. So anxious to see how those come.
Michelle?
Well, we just got through the fiscal year end, the new fiscal year, so there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes to be done, a lot of passports, and Chantry's busy working on taxes to get those out. So it's nice we don't have BPTs this year to wait for, so we can hopefully get taxes done earlier than normal, so that's a good thing.
Okay, who did the donuts?
Jason?
Oh,
Sean.
you didn't help. Okay, thank you everyone. There's notes, compliments to Jason. consider cleaning courthouse windows.
I talked to that gentleman again about cleaning them in the inside. He said they could do that, but he said that if there's a file cabinet in the way of the windows or anything that they wouldn't be able to clean those windows, and that it would, opening on the windows have a lot of hot air coming in if that's what the board sort of chooses. But if we didn't do the windows on the outside, that was like $2,500, you would take $700 off. But to clean the inside of the windows was $1,100, so we're talking $3,600 minus $800 for the lift. Or we could just do the outside windows, would be $2,500, and maybe have the cleaning Rich or Reggie clean the inside. I don't know what the board wants.
The basement windows are pretty, they're as tall as these
Right.
ones here, so we would be able to do probably the outside and the inside.
Probably in the lower level. It's just in the second and third floor, they would have a higher lift. So, I mean, I could talk to them again and just have them do the second and third floor, and then have Reggie or Rich have them do the bottom layer from the outside. I mean, you still have to have a lift, but I don't know if the inside windows, I don't think we have to have them. I think,
I think it's all the dirt from the outside,
Yeah,
so you can't
I
see
would
out
agree.
those.
Do we have to remove the screen from the inside? too?
they said the screen on the outside is removable.
Oh, from the outside?
Mhm.
Oh.
So he said that wouldn't be a problem at all doing that, so. But they're dirty, they need to be cleaned.
But those other windows downstairs should be small enough, I think we could probably get them ourselves.
Reggie was cleaning some of them down there.
What are your wishes?
I'd say just do the outside of the second and third floor.
Okay. It's a motion.
Yep.
Okay, we've got a motion to do the outside of the second and third floor. Do we have support?
I'll support that.
We have support. All in favor? Opposed? Passes. That's going to take a little bit, so
Probably.
can we skip her over there or not? No, we won't.
Is on,
Wait.
No,
is on.
He's not, he's gone to meeting in Des Moines, but he did send that, what he sent out,
This,
the email. That's why he emailed everybody.
It's probably not enough time to hit that.
yeah, we're just waiting.
We were gonna go there on Saturday, but they were closed. We had our kids home and Trevor loved them for their donuts, so we thought we would go get donuts before we head out and they were closed. And their muffins, it looks like.
Okay, it's 9:30. Iowa Drainage District Association, legislative update.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to be here this morning and see you all. I'm John Torpey, the Iowa Drainage District Association. Recognize some faces around the room here. Talk first of all a little bit about state legislature this year. One bill that passed that we were very pleased about dealt with a issue that has been around now for about 10 years, and that relates to who pays when you have drainage infrastructure crossing a railroad line, or vice versa. And for many years, what the law said was that when railroads and drainage structures meet, it's the railroad's responsibility to repair, replace, or reinstall. Well, the law doesn't really refer to drainage infrastructure, it refers to culverts and bridges. So the railroads went to the courts and said, drain tile is not a culvert, it's not a bridge, so we don't have the responsibility to do that when it's drain tile. And the Iowa Supreme Court found in favor of that argument, and that was back, I think, in either 2013 or 2015. So this year, with the help of a friendly state senator, we were able to get that changed and basically state that culvert equals drain tile. So we restored it back to the way that it was. So now, as of July 1st, so last week, it is again the railroad's responsibility when they have rail property that intersects drainage infrastructure. It's going to be the railroad's responsibility to take care of that. Repair, replace, reinstall. The railroads, through using the courts, have shifted that cost to landowners, and now, using the legislature, we've shifted that cost back. So that's a pretty big deal. We were very pleased about that. Railroads fought it tooth and nail, as you would expect. But we were able to prevail in the legislature. The second bill that, was probably the most major bill that we saw, other than the railroad one, was House File 711. First of all, that first bill was House File 714. Second bill was House File 711, which also did pass. And this probably won't have a direct impact on you, but the background of this bill was that you had some in the legislature that expressed concerns, not so much about drainage districts, but levee districts. And we have a lot of levee districts, as you would expect, along the rivers. So on the Missouri River side and a few on the Mississippi River side. And, you know, their responsibility is a little bit different. They're controlling flood. And we have some legislators, principally over in western Iowa, that have concern about a lot of the levee districts were not being maintained properly. And these are districts mainly due to tradition and history. A lot of them are run by elected trustees. They're not run by the county board of supervisors. So the legislature authorized Homeland Security to go in and start looking at levies, not from the point of view of being punitive, but from the point of view of saying, what do we have, and what kind of shape is our infrastructure in? And do we need to be doing things as a legislature to help these levee districts maintain their structures differently so that we can get a better handle on flooding along the Missouri River? So as a result of that, what they have done is two things. First of all, they have created a state appropriation of $5 million from gambling revenues. And that's going to be a fund that can be tapped on a cost share basis to do repair and maintenance on levees. It's not a grant, it's a cost share, so there does have to be local money put into it to be able to attract that money. Second thing that's going to happen is Homeland Security is going to do an official study of all the levees along the Missouri River and assign a numeric ranking to those levees. They haven't said what that ranking's going to be yet, but 1 to 5, with 1 being the best and 5 being the worst. And I assume then that they're going to try to concentrate those $5 million resources on those levees that are in the worst shape. So I heard a presentation on this from Homeland Security back, I think in March, and they worked with us initially on looking at the levees, and I asked the gentleman that if he could come give that presentation at our annual conference in December. He agreed to do that, so we'll be talking about that again in December. So the important part of that is that for the first time since I've been doing this 20+ years, we've got state money going into drainage infrastructure. So that's a pretty big deal. Second thing I talk about, as you know, during our annual conference each year, we have a breakout session with the drainage clerks. I was approached last year by a drainage clerk in another county that said, you know, we should be holding these meetings twice a year as opposed to once a year. So they posed that question to the group in December, and they agreed that they did want to meet again. They thought it was beneficial if they have 2 meetings a year as opposed to 1 meeting a year. So we have a meeting set on July 20th, which will be a week from Thursday, in Fort Dodge. And I will be there, and our legal counsel will be there. It will be free, no cost to register, just show up. Starting at 9 a.m. and we'll run 3 hours, and it will just be open discussion. Get questions answered about what drainage clerks are doing on current issues, and just sharing of information and talking with our legal counsel. So if you all have an interest in that, that will be a week from Thursday. Next thing I'll talk about on the federal level, and I've been talking for years now about waters of the U.S. and the impact on drainage. We finally have some clarity on this. Go back a little bit in history, and this waters of the U.S. issue has sort of been a political ping pong ball, but we've had traded back and forth over the net between first the Obama administration and then the Trump administration and now the Biden administration, all wanting to change policy on waters of the U.S. And why that's important to you all is depending on what that policy says, potentially drainage could be in the situation of having to get Clean Water Act permits to do drainage maintenance and improvements, and we didn't want to get to that situation. Where you all have to get permission from the DNR to do your job. So there was a case known as the Sackett case, which went to the U.S. Supreme Court, which directly spoke to the ability of EPA to regulate waters and define what waters they have the ability to regulate. Now, what EPA was trying to do was use what they called the concept of nexus. Nexus is connection. And what the EPA was saying, well, you've got a little farm pond out here, and that farm pond might drain somewhere to a stream, and that stream might drain to a larger river or a larger stream, and that larger stream might drain to a river, and that river is a water of the U.S., so therefore that farm pond is part of the waters of the U.S. because it's connected. And they were using this connection approach to try basically to regulate every puddle of water in the United States. And the Supreme Court came back and said, no, you cannot do that. So the Supreme Court issued their decision, I think late May, and basically told EPA that they did not have the ability to use Nexus to regulate every farm pond and every puddle in the United States. And due to the way the Supreme Court defined it, from a drainage point of view, we're no longer in a situation of having to be concerned about it. So that was really the best possible result of that lawsuit. Last thing I'll mention briefly relates to the issue of when you need to get an engineer opinion when you're doing a drainage repair. Now, what the law said, I think about 3 years ago, was that if the drainage repair exceeded $50,000, you needed to have an engineer's opinion as part of that repair. And I have a lot of counties telling me that $50,000 when you get into drainage repairs is nothing. You go through that really quickly. So we were able to go to the legislature and get that changed, and what was replaced, or what that language was replaced was what is called competitive bid threshold. And competitive bid threshold is a number that's set by DOT. It's not set by the legislature, it's set by DOT. The good thing about the competitive bid threshold is you don't have to change law to change the competitive bid threshold. DOT can look at circumstances and make changes in it. So that $50,000, at least initially, became $139,000. So you can spend up to $139,000 on a repair without having to get an engineer's report. That number was revised again in January, and that now has gone to $196,000. So you can go up to almost $200,000 now without the requirement of getting an engineer's report. Now, certainly you can still get one at any time. If you think a repair is gonna be, you know, a complex one or a complicated one, that you would be best off and your landowners would be best served by having an engineer look at it, and you can certainly do that at any time. But I had a lot of counties tell me, you know, we're just talking about routine repairs here. And when you're just doing a routine repair, don't need to have an engineer look at it. If you get an engineer involved, you're probably gonna potentially double the cost of the project. So let's give trustees, the ability to make those decisions. So the upside of that is you can now go up to $196,000 without getting an engineer. So, with that, I'm happy to respond to any questions.
I didn't realize the waters of the US, that was changed. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. We knew going in that the Sackett case, that was probably the best opportunity we had to get that changed with the current Supreme Court, because it directly went to the issue of regulation, and did EPA have the ability to do that regulation? So that was probably the best possible result.
That's good.
Yeah.
What is the threshold for that? I mean, how far back up the chain can you go to say that it's the waters of the US? There's gotta be a navigable river, or do small creeks fit into that?
I don't have that language in front of me, but I'll send that to you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, discuss Yankee Land Holding LLC request for amendment to the urban renewal. Any thoughts?
What was the request?
I don't think they made an actual year request, did they?
They talked, another what, 5 or 10 years,
Extend the current one, I think is what they,
and we'll have for year 8 out of 10 of the current year. Amendment.
So what's the request?
I think to extend it out beyond 10 years. That's what my thoughts were, how I interpret that.
I did too. I'd like to see another 5 years. I don't know what you guys think, but
they're building back in excess of what was there, and I've asked them to provide some information to get
It does look like a bigger book.
an idea, but had they built that footprint initially, they would have had rebate applied to it. That doesn't mean that it has to now. You can give some reason to consider it. I still have moved towards this may present an opportunity to alter it rather than just extend it, and find a way to support funding for the jail project. So we don't have to just do what they requested, it's an opportunity, to me, it's an opportunity to use the process in a way that would be beneficial to our residents and taxpayers. aka limited.
any other thoughts?
I don't have enough information to go on. I don't know what the value of the building is. I don't,
Well, they've added another building. And the one they had, they remodeled that, didn't they? Didn't they turn it into a shop?
I think they did do some improvements to the cold storage
Yeah.
structure they had, they were using it temporarily.
there needs to be more information.
How many dollars are there?
Because you can't just make a motion based off of what might be. I mean, you don't have a number. I don't have a number. And depending on the number, it might be more beneficial to leave it on the tax rolls, so it hits the general fund. But without,
There's never a question of not paying taxes. On the tax rolls, we're considering extension of the rebate to them, but we receive the taxes and we rebate it back. Other approaches have used donation to entities that if we see benefit from a county standpoint, I think frees up the ability to provide funding to the jail project, so it's not all on the debt service levy pending voter approval. That's a big question mark too, but I think there's room to give a bigger picture thought on this, and it's gonna require us coming up with ideas. I said before, we have 5 people at this table, we have an economic development director. I don't think it'd be crazy to have 6 ideas to consider, not just that they ask for an extension.
does the assessor have any idea of what, you haven't seen any blueprints or nothing?
Jason gave me some, or they provided a few measurements, but it wasn't enough to go on.
They do have that wash stall structure substantially finished. Is there a way to get a rough estimate from your office on what
Well,
that
yeah.
might add? Indicated the original building would probably be basically the same footprint. They wouldn't have a wash facility structure inside that building and more of a trailer build area.
Of course, the new building's gonna go on at, on our new manual on new 2020 costs, and everybody knows what costs are done since they built the original building, so, it's fair to assume that the value's gonna be 50% more than the original.
That's been floating in my head. I wouldn't be
Yeah.
shocked if we're 50%
Right.
above. And legal counsel has said is if we do the extension, that's possible, it would just leave what's currently being captured as revenue and add what gets added, and the rebate would proceed as it was. If we were to do an amendment, we would move from the current base of, I don't remember, the base was awfully low, $5,000 or something. And then the tip revenue was the million plus that they had in valuations. Now we would move to 500,000, which is where we're at after the fire, right? If the amendment process was used, we would be looking at an additional $490,000 on the tax base, like you say, and then the incremental revenue would only be captured on the rebuild and new build. So that process would increase the general fund or the base, but would still likely provide significant revenue to consider for plan.
So then are they gonna give back that money to be donated somewhere else? I mean, I don't understand.
It'd be a percentage JRJ though.
Yeah, it depends what we're up to,
Yeah.
open to. They indicated that. I did have an opportunity to talk with Adam yesterday, and he said that his accountant didn't know that they saw the big benefit of the rebate and the donation thing that others have touted it to be. But he said they were certainly willing to do a donation, and JRJ, we basically gave
20 years?
the 100% rebate, and the donation they promised or committed to was basically like 25%
Ten
Make it
thousand.
$10,000.
Weren't we working off about a $40,000 tax bill with the rebate, and they were paying about 25% in, so it was about a 75% rebate in a sense.
And that money went where?
They're donating to economic development.
So it doesn't make it back into the general fund.
In a roundabout way, because then we don't have to donate as much to economic development.
We never altered that. With this one, I would
You can't
encourage
use that
that.
money to pay for anything in economic development anyway. You can't use it for salaries or any of the rest of that.
No, what we use it for is roads.
For the revolving loan fund.
But we provide annual funding to economic
Oh,
development.
yeah.
My thought on this would be is if they're choosing to donate to something that we already commit funding to, that we would have the opportunity to reduce funding from the county level to commit to the jail project.
And right now, you know, what we rebate back, the other portion of that, we're putting the P and I to pay out that $750,000. That's gonna be paid for in June of '24. So that will be done. The only thing that we will be collecting is just the rebate to DAC, not the other portion. That portion will go back to all the other entities and our levy authorities. Does that make sense?
So that other half would be hitting the general fund and all the
Yeah,
other
all the other
options
entities, yeah.
in
After,
'24.
yeah.
So they haven't had it available and haven't been accustomed to it. So to me, it's good timing to consider other options, because it wouldn't be taking something away from a fund that already had been receiving that.
How are you taking something away?
I'm saying we wouldn't be, because that other half has been committed specifically to paying off the bond we previously had. We're getting to the point where that bond will be paid, that half would then be sent into rural services or rural fund. General fund, rural services, general supplemental, those other funds, they wouldn't have had that available to them before. So if the change is made now, they would just be diverted from what it had been supporting to something new, and it wouldn't be taken out of funds that had been receiving or having access to.
Well, the approach seems just a little bit sketch if you're asking someone to give money to something else for us to give you tax money for your business. I mean, that just, it doesn't sound right.
I'm just trying to be creative and trying to do what we can to limit what that debt service on a potential jail project would be. I'm not trying to be sketch, I'm not trying to be dishonest. If there are things that we can do and options available to us, I think it's in the interest of the taxpayers to research those and to do what we can. But we can just rely on debt service levy and add that to every piece of property, and if the voters approve it. So, we can look for reasons to not do things, or we can try to come up with ways to do things with what's available to us.
Try to promote a little bit.
Usually this money is for new businesses and startups, and when that went out there, it was a new business out there. So I guess I don't understand extending it for something that's not new.
Urban renewal law is open to areas to use for a variety of purposes, so I don't agree that it's only focused on new businesses.
But, you know, I look at the most recent business that went out there that didn't hit us up for any money. We didn't pay to pave the road, we didn't pay for any infrastructure. They got 0 tax rebates out of it at all, and that was a benefit to the taxpayer.
I don't disagree.
That's a $1 million.
So I don't know.
How many other examples can you think of in the last 20 years that people have just been clamoring to come here and build and not asking anything
Well,
about it?
there's one right there, so you can't say never.
I know, I'm saying others, one other beside that, because there are lots that have looked for ways to partner, and that's what I'm.
So if we take that donation, Jason, I don't quite understand that, they can donate that to the jail fund or to, how do,
Well, Andre indicated they could make a donation to the community foundation, and rather than those donations going into the
grant cycle funds, that foundation could consider supporting something. I don't know, this is still theoretical, we haven't gotten into the weeds, but I want to research potentials. The one that went into my mind is just say that they like conservation, so they want to make a donation to conservation. Well, we have an annual amount that we fund conservation to, so if they're doing a $25,000 donation to conservation, to me, I don't think it's unreasonable then to reduce our funding of conservation by $20,000 to $25,000.
Do you think that'll happen? Do you think we'll reduce?
Well, that's on us, we wouldn't need to.
I know, but.
We did,
To me, to reduce the debt service levy, yeah, it's gonna be in my attention, because when Maggie presented that every 10,000, reduce the levy by about 2 cents. So, yeah, that's gonna stick in my head, personally.
But they can't guarantee that, right?
No, we can't.
And we can't really put language in there saying that they have to.
Yeah,
Well,
that's
JRG
that was
My thought,
JRG did.
and I don't know that our current bond council would be comfortable or want to do that, from the impression I've gotten. Have that specific requirement language. It would become more of an understanding, and my thought towards that concern is that we would have language that would give us the right to annually consider continuing with the urban renewal agreement. That we could just, if they don't do a donation, then we just say it's over.
Trying to look at the big picture. So if they would give us a donation, it would be a tax savings for them. They could deduct that. I'm just trying to think on their side of what their gain would be to give us a donation.
Seems to me that I'm trying to remember the right language for it, I don't. But it is a tax deduction for them.
But if that money ends up down at economic development can't go and apply it to the jail, I don't think. So I don't know how that reduces any of that.
Well, what do you call that board?
Community foundation.
Yeah, community foundation. Economic development just oversees it, it's not part of economic development.
You and I sit on the community foundation board,
Yeah.
it's not economic development.
But then, that's for small nonprofits. I mean, I don't know that that would fit into what the goal of that board is, to start paying down debt service from the county.
Yeah, I don't know.
I need more information.
Is Dave here?
He's running a little late.
Sounds like that.
Right here.
Yeah.
Right on
So-
time.
So according to this item, what are you looking for?
Well, I
Just
think they
talk,
deserve
just
an answer,
discussion, or-
they asked for us to consider, and their ask was an extension. I believe they deserve an answer, yes, no, or we're exploring other options. Where I sit right now is I'd like the idea of exploring other options. But if we can't have a majority of the board interested in that, then we should give them a yes or no answer.
I would be for that. I'd like to see it.
I'd like to explore that.
And it'd be commercial, right?
Do we have the concern, Jason, of everybody else with their hand out there?
Yes
I
and
know
no.
somebody has asked me about it already, so.
Yes and no, but how do we ever guarantee we don't get it anyway?
Oh, I know.
But I mean, to me, that concern is less when I'm saying, we're going to the voters to ask them to approve a multi-million-dollar jail funding project. We're doing all we can to find other ways to support that, to reduce that. So, no, I don't think it does just open the door to.
Yeah, because they added a new building, they remodeled one. They've done quite a bit. I That's just my thought.
but it doesn't happen in that process.
And I guess I somewhat like the idea of knowing, yeah, we're gonna be hit up to things rather than businesses and entities thinking, don't bother asking, because they're not gonna do a thing for it. I guess I would caution sitting in that camp versus being open to discussions.
All right. I didn't know those.
I know you have, sir. I've heard it before, Gary, that no, you can't do that, so it very well may be the answer, but it's just not gonna stop me from trying to think of ways to
Because we do want to attract more people.
try to accomplish things.
Are you eating?
What do we give you, 30 minutes? 20?
Tell me.
I was thinking 18.
I'll accomplish it. I just talked to Lion
Promise?
this morning. I just talked to Lion for how much this morning,
So
so
you're already
I'm
clocked
already
out.
clocked out.
I don't believe that.
No, I think you're probably right. Yeah, perfect.
Okay, give us your sales pitch.
Are you ready? You are. Thank you guys for allowing me to come visit with you again today. I appreciate that. The management communication letter, this is no different than the past. It is the same concept where we just talk about some of the highlights, that these are based on estimates. Some of the estimates could change, that the county corrected the adjustments that we recommended. There was no disagreements with management. You can get a copy of the representation letter, a copy be in the auditor's office. That we follow different things, procedures for RS that required supplementary information and required supplementary information and schedules. There was no single audit required this year. Your expenditures. So on a single audit, it's $750,000, but it's based on expenditures not received. So if you get in $1 million of ARP money, only as you spend it does it count. So you can get $1 million in federal money, but if you only spent $650, it's under the $750, so there's no audit required, and that's kind of what happened this year. Your federal programs receipts were more, but the disbursements were under the $750, therefore there was no single audit this past year.
I'm surprised Chantry was that easy to get along with over there.
Well, it'll come back, because eventually you're gonna spend more than you take in, and then you're gonna have one. We just didn't go with that part of it.
Okay.
And that we don't see that you consulted another CPA firm about accounting policies. If you do, we're supposed to know about it, so we know to take that into consideration. So that's the management communication letter. The audit report, I'm just gonna try to hit on highlights, which, still takes me an awful long time, as you all know, because you've heard that before, so I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. But, so basically, on pages 1 and 2, you get the officials of the county and the Public Safety Board, Commission Board, recognition for their service during the fiscal year 21-22. Our independent auditors report, of course, can't leave well enough alone, so we kind of have revamped that again, and the format of it, but I guess the nice thing is the opinion. It's right up front, second paragraph. In our opinion, we feel that you can rely on these financials as being fairly presented in materiality purposes. So that's the key there, is that we're stating that we feel it's materially correct, that you can rely on them within materiality quantifications and qualifications. Basis for opinions just talks about, the statutes, the standards we follow when we perform the audit. Responsibilities of management talks about your responsibility as the management of the county. It talks about what our responsibilities are during the audit. Required supplementary information is items that are required to be included with the audit, but we technically do not audit them.
We do not give an opinion on their fair assurance. We just kind of take a look at them and see, do they look like they're in relation, that they don't jump out as improper. And that includes your management's discussion analysis, which we'll look at next, the budget, all the IPERS notes, and all the OPEB notes that we included here. Supplementary information, which is the schedules that we'll look at from 1 through 10. We do an in relation to opinion for that. So we state in relation to the financial statements, we do believe those schedules are fairly presented. And then we talk about the internal control and compliance report at the end, and the need to make sure to go and look at that at the end. So management's discussion analysis, this is a summary of the financials from the management, basically the auditor's office point of view. We work with Rochelle, get her the numbers, and then she kind of puts together the analysis for us, and that we greatly appreciate. So this is kind of your clip notes. This is kind of when we're looking at exhibits, when we're looking at the financials and the schedules, and I'll refer back to, well, this can be found on this page. This is kind of the summary where if you want to know more detail, you go back to here and say, okay, well, this is what kind of occurred during the year and the reasoning for it to get you a better understanding. So use it as a tool to complement each other is what I'm stating. Fiscal year 21-22, this is the highlights of first of all, the funds, totals for the individual funds, and then the county as a whole from a full accrual accounting point. Then we use how to use this annual report. It basically talks about the significant components of the audit report that follows. We talk about government-wide financial statements are referring to full accrual, exhibits A and B. Then you have your fund financial statements, which are exhibits C, E, and G through K. And you have three types of governmental funds. You have the governmental funds, which are general, special revenue, debt service. We have then, number 2, you have your proprietary funds, which is your employee group health fund. And the third type is you have fiduciary funds, where the county officials hold money for different entities, and those are construed as custodial funds. Those are mainly like your assessors, emergency management, E911, and then the different schools, cities, townships, taxing authorities. Then we give the reconciliation, talk about reconciliations to tie those together. Component unit, this is your Public Safety Commission. So this section here talks about how did the Public Safety Commission change from fiscal year 21-22 compared to 2021. So it kind of gives you a synopsis on the public safety and as well as its budgetary comparison. Then we have the government-wide financial analysis, which is your Exhibit A. So basically this is a summary of Exhibit A, so you can have a comparison. So as I mentioned before, what's most important is what is in your net position, what is in your fund balance. If you have huge amount of assets, deferred outflows, but the liabilities and deferred inflows exceeded, well, we're in a negative position. That's not good. So we really are concerned about what is that net position. So the net position is the bottom section there. So on the government activities, all the counties total, you went from 28.6 million to $30.4 million, so that increased. And then what's the component? What increased? Net investment in capital assets increased, as well as the restricted and the unrestricted. And of course, we're most, restricted is your special revenue funds primarily, your general supplemental, anything where it's restricted for a specific purpose. The unrestricted basically means you can use for any county purpose. And of course, that's the balance that to me, I find is the most important, and it went up $1 million, which is good. So, because that's really what's available to use for whatever purpose you wish to accomplish. Public Safety Commission also increased. They went from $1 million, basically just over $1 million, to just over $1.4 million as well in their increase. And then on page 11, we have Exhibit B, and this talks about how did the county as a whole, how did that change? So we just looked at the net position for the county and the public safety. how did it change during the fiscal year? And we give you a comparison again to the prior year. And this is Exhibit B, is when we'll be analyzing that. Total revenues went up from $10.5 million to $11.8 million. Total expenses also increased, but not quite as much. They went up from $9.6 million to just over $10 million. So your net increase a year ago was $950,000. This year it was $1.8 million. And so that's where you see. So each year it's increased, and that's good from a financial point of view. Public safety also had that increase of $362,000 compared to the year before. It increased by $250,000. So as well, that did. And then it talks about, on the top of page 12, what are some of the reasonings for those changes. Then we get into your individual major funds. So the individual major funds are your exhibits C and E. It's on a modified accrual basis. Your major fund is any fund where in the fund you take your total of all governmental funds, assets, liabilities, revenues, and expenditures, come up with the total for each, take it times 10%, and if the 10%, if a fund has more than 10% in any of those categories, it is construed as a major fund, and it has to be, we basically audit it more thoroughly. It shows up separately on your exhibits, and the others are kind of all lumped together and audited kind of like as a whole. Now, so you as a county always have the right, though, to say, hey, this isn't showing up as a major fund because it doesn't meet the 10% requirement. If there's a specific fund that you feel is important that you want audited as a major, you always have the right to request that and include it as a major fund. So you're going to see a few changes in major funds compared to 2021 versus 21-22 based on those calculations and the importance. So we have as a major the general fund, and the general fund by statute is always major. You would think it would be anyway, but it is by statute always major. The rural services fund met those requirements. The secondary roads fund, because of all the activity in the drainage funds, this past in 21-22, that was a major fund because that went over the level. We have your debt service funds, your FML TIP P&I and the CFE TIP P&I. Those ended up being your major funds, and then list all the other special revenue funds later. Page 14, budgetary highlights. It just talks about the budget, that there was 2 amendments, and gives you the reasoning for the changes in the amendments. And again, that is a good, we'll utilize that when we're looking at the budgetary comparison report. Capital assets, this just basically is by classification a summary of comparatively how did the capital assets change. It refers to note 6 in the financial statements where you can look at it. But the biggest thing here is what were some of the major additions during the fiscal year and as to how the amounts changed within the different classifications. Then we list the debt issuances that you had outstanding, and you had 3 during the fiscal year. You have your bonds from 17, your bonds from 19, and then drainage warrants are construed as long-term debt as well. So we talked about that in that part of it. Economic factors just talked about things that were utilized to set the 22-23 fiscal year financials and what you expected, and then how to contact management. So this is just a synopsis. It basically gives you an analysis tool compared to the actual financials. So on Exhibit A, we have the full accrual statement and net position. This basically is like a for-profit business. It lists all the different assets, deferred outflows, liabilities, deferred inflows, and net position. And as we said, what's most important is the net position. So as we talked about, you have $22 million of the $30 million in net position is in the form of capital assets. You have $6.6 million that's restricted for different purposes, and you can kind of see these purposes. Here it breaks them down, what that's reserved for what purpose. And then we talked about how the unrestricted did go up $1 million, so $1.7 million is in unrestricted from restricted purposes as well, to come up with the $30 million. Public Safety Commission has $200,000 in capital assets and unrestricted for its purposes of $1.2 million. So this is as of June 30, what you had as assets and debt, and what would be left. And then on page 21, 22, we show how did that change during the year, from 21 to 22. Again, you can look on, if you wanted to know reasoning behind it, look on pages 11 and 12 of the MD&A Management's Discussion Analysis will give you that kind of a breakdown of what some of the significance were. And again, this is meant to be a statement to show what are the expenses by function, how much revenue was generated by that function in the form of services, operating grants, or capital grants, to come up with what is the amount that was needed to be funded by general revenues for each of the functions. So it's meant to show you by function how much general revenues needed to support that function. And general revenues include your property taxes, your TIF, your state credits, the rent, your investments, rents, drainage, and just the overall miscellaneous. So the county as a whole needed $5.7 million of general revenues to cover what the functions do generate. Public Safety Commissions, by nature, it generated $362,000 more than its costs. The general revenues amounted to $7.5 million though, which more than offset by $1.8 million the functions shortfall, and so that's how we came from our $28.6 million to the $30.4 million. So that again is the county as a whole looking long-term, including all assets, liabilities. Now we're going to go into the fund statements, which I know you deal with more on a regular basis. This is done using modified accrual. The purpose of this statement is basically to say, what did we have on hand that we could use in fiscal year 22-23? So it's a short-term approach. It's basically trying to say, what in the fund balances could you realistically use within the next year in the near term in order to use? So it doesn't include anything of long-term nature, such as your capital assets or your long-term debt. So this is meant to be a short-term approach. And so we list each of the different major funds. So you've got your general, your rural services, secondary road, and drainage for special revenues. We got the 2 debt service funds, and then we list the non-major special revenue funds that remain. That you can see the detail in Schedule 1. So if you look at Schedule 1, you can see all the detail which makes up those different funds. And so, and what's most important, as I said before, is fund balances. So what do you have for fund balances? So that bottom section there, in the general, you have $3.5 million in your general. $46,000 is in the form of prepaid expenditures. $950,000 is in the form of restricted, whether it be the general supplemental purpose, hotel motel, jail and courthouse security, and conservation land acquisition that you said it's going to go towards. And then you have what would be remaining for any county purpose of just over $2.5 million. So for a total of 3.5. Rural Services has $557,000. Secondary Roads has just under $4.6 million. $1,078,000 though is in the form of inventories and prepaids. And 3.5 is really what they have available then to use for other secondary roads purposes. Drainage districts have $385,000. Then you get into your amended ethanol TIF areas, debt service has $328,000. The CFE TIF area has $1,427,000. The non-majors as a total had a negative $179,000, and that's because of TIF when we look at that schedule, for a total of just over $9.2 million in fund balances for all your different funds of the county. And then any audit report for an accountant wouldn't be complete without a reconciliation telling you how you go from the modified accrual fund statements to the full accrual county-wide statement, so Exhibit C to Exhibit A, and we give you all the different transactions that occurred to get you from that point forward and to reconcile the two. Then on page 28, we have Exhibit E. This again is the modified accrual. Again, it's on a short-term basis. It's trying to, what's generated that can be used in the near term, and it's done by a fund basis. Again, we list all the major funds, and then the non-major is Schedule 2. So the totals under the non-major you can find by going to see the details on Schedule 2. And then the total column, you could go to your management discussion analysis, page 7, and that would give you a synopsis of what were the major changes for the county governmental as a whole. So basically, we list the revenues, expenditures, then we list other revenue financing sources and expenses. So basically, your transfers in and out. And then the one thing unique about governmental accounting is when you issue debt, it is shown as an other financing and sources and increases your fund balance. Because again, it's not going to have to be paid back for long term. That's why it is construed that it increases what's available to spend in the near term. So that's why you're going to see drainage increased from a negative to a decent positive balance because of all the drainage warrants they issued. So that's why they created the full accrual statements, because it was deceiving in a way if you didn't include ever your debt anywhere, and then they had the whole Orange County thing, and that's kind of when we started showing a full for the county too. So people aren't just looking at this and saying, well, these numbers are great, not taking into consideration, well, yeah, but there's this out there, that out there that isn't showing up here. So the change in the general fund, the last three columns, increased by $42,000 from 3.5, just over $3,530,000 to $3,573,000. Road services increased by $99,000 from $458,000 to $557,000. Secondary roads increased by $567,000 from just over $4 million to $4,591,000. Your drainage, as I was using an example, because of the drainage warrants, stamped drainage warrants issued, actually increased by right under $700,000. So it went from a deficit balance of $314 to a positive $385. Your amended ethanol tip debt service increased by just under $180,000, from $139 to $328,000. The CFE tip in area went down by $34,000. So it had a starting balance of $36,000 and now it's still at $1,400 though. And then we got your non-major revenues, which will be included later on, all the other special revenues, increased by $53,000, went from a deficit of negative $232 to a deficit of $179. And then get you explained, so it's a $1.6 million change for the governmental funds for the county as a whole during the fiscal year. Then we reconcile again the modified Exhibit E of the individual funds to the full accrual of all the county Exhibit D, and gives you all the adjustments so you can get from one exhibit to the other. Then we have your employee group health fund, your partially funded health insurance fund. That is on an accrual basis. It shows that you had $924,507 restricted in that at the end of fiscal year 21-22 for the health fund. How did that change during the fiscal year? You took in revenues of $1,073,000. You had expenses, primarily insurance premiums, but some contributions to HSAs, medical claims of $842,000. So your revenue exceeded your expenses by $230,000, at $350 in interest income. So your net balance increased by $231,000 from $693,000 to $924,000. So, and then we have the change in the cash. And again, that's for all the new accounting levers. I just want to see how did cash change in the health fund. It gives you a detailed analysis of that. So we're not going to spend much time on that. Custodial funds. These are the funds that your officials are holding for other entities. Again, like we talked about, it's going to be your emergency management, E911, your taxing authorities, township schools. This is a summary of those. And so you have your financial position on June 30, 22. That is a summary of Schedule 3. So you can see what makes up the individual funds that make up these totals in Schedule 3. And then how did it change during the year? That you can see the totals here, and again, the detail would be on Schedule 4. So you can give it by the individual funds on those. Then we have your notes. So basically, the audit report is opinion saying that the financials are fairly presented, those are the exhibits we just looked at. Now we state that the notes are also, these are meant to supplement, basically explain what the notes are. I'm just gonna hit on each one, what's in that particular section. Summary of significant accounting policy basically explains the county structure. Reporting entity, it explains the financial reporting entity of Osceola County. How do you determine what's included in these financials? Why are drainage districts, even though they're legally separate, included as a special revenue fund? Why do we show the Public Safety Commission as a discretely presented component, union compared? Explains why. Jointly governed organizations, it talks about all those different entities that you're members of, or you're appointed to their boards, and how they're related to the county, and what you paid to them during the year, or what they contributed to you for purposes. We talked about the joint venture that you have with the Economic Development Commission, and how that relationship is, and what you contributed, and what was paid, again, back and forth with them. Basis of accounting, just like we talked about in the MD&A, just talks about government-wide, which is on a full accrual. Fund statements are on the modified to short-term approach. It goes on to list here what those major funds are, explains what are the different major funds and what their purpose is. And then it talks about that you also have the internal service fund for your health insurance, and those custodial funds where you act as a fiduciary for. Measurement basis and basis of accounting. This talks about timing of recognition. It basically says, when are transactions actually recognized in these financials? And so that kind of talks about the full accrual, the modified, and when you recognize stuff in there. And that's continued on to page 39. Then on page 39 all the way to 44, here's where we basically explain in Exhibit A and Exhibit C, your statement of net position and your balance sheets for the individual funds, what are the different assets, liabilities, deferred inflows and deferred outflows, what are the classifications you'll see on those statements, and it's meant to explain, so if you go to a particular classification, you can come back here and say, okay, this is what makes up the amount that is showing there. So we basically just go through and list those. What I do want to point out on page 41, during the fiscal year, the county did implement GASB 87, which is leases. It's a new standard that was implemented during the year that basically says, because the county is a party to a long-term lease, anything that lasts over a year, whether it be you're the lessor, where you're renting out something, like farmland, for instance, or you're the lessee, where you're renting a long-term copier, or fax, printers, or a piece of equipment, any other kind of equipment. The government standards board said, well, there's a liability and an asset. You have a right for that many years to use an asset, but you also have a commitment, basically, to pay it over those many years. So now they're saying we had to analyze it, and anything that came over more than a $5,000 base value that lasted for more than a year after the end of the fiscal year, we had to put a value on, put it back, and then report it as a capital asset and as a long-term liability. So as a lessee, you did not have any that came over the 5,000. So we're not going to see any right-to-use lease asset. We're not going to see any lease liabilities, because you didn't have any that were over 5,000. The one contract that came over 5, but you're splitting it with public safety. So when I considered it, half public safety, half the county, it was just below the 5,000, so we didn't have to report it. But going forward, that's something that's going to evolve. So every year, we're going to have to be taking a look at any new agreements that are entered into. If there's changes, like there's a change in the lease circumstances, or the changed terms, that's something we're going to have to evolve. And then you also lease out farmland. that we do then show as a lease receivable, because you basically, they have a commitment to pay you for those leases. But then it's offset and not recognized as revenue, because technically it isn't earned until that time frame comes, and then they pay you. So again, a lot of ins and outs and calculations for something that pretty much balances itself out. So that's new. I just wanted to make sure you point that out. But everything else in that section is similar to the years before and what their purposes are. Budgets and budgetary accounting just talks about then on pages 63 and 64. You have your budgetary comparison, and then on 66 for the Public Safety Commission, so make sure you look at that. It talks about that situation. Cash equivalents, it just talks about what you as a county are allowed to invest in per your county investment policy. It talks about the different bank accounts, CDs, stamped warrants, and IPAs that the county is invested in, and what kind of risk that is for the county. Note 3 just talks about interfund receivables and payables, and what's the reasoning for it. So one fund owes another fund. A lot of times that's in the reasoning, and so you can see, back and forth. So Public Safety Commission owes in Unified Law levy, the county's Unified Law owes the public safety for its collections. Then you have basically, a lot of it's TIP related, where the money was borrowed from general to the different TIP areas, and now those payments are getting paid back. Same with secondary roads and the Senex co-op TIP, they're paying them back. And then just timing of collections versus payment. So from your individual offices, like the recorder, the sheriff, the auditor, and timing of when they pay it back over to the county funds. And we list the reasoning for those on the bottom of page 45. Then we have your interfund transfers on a modified accrual basis, and then we show the reasoning for those transfers. So again, it shows you, like for instance, the statutory requirement for rural services to transfer money to secondary roads, and money being transferred back and forth between the TIP funds to the debt service funds for which the payments are being made, and the money that you transferred into conservation land acquisition, and here we list the reasoning. Then we have the farmland leases receivable. That's that new GASB 7 that I was referring to in regards to leases that extended over a year. So you have farmland leases that extended into 23 and shows $39,500 is to be paid based on those agreements, and in 24 another $19,796 for a total of $59,000 payments. But then we have to put it back to present value and say that of that, part of it's really interest, and so we have to downsize it and show only $58,000 in the financials, and then as it's paid, we have to allocate part of it to interest. Again, to me, it's just a lot of back and forth in accounting, and then the real value maybe, but I could see for a county that it is a significant component, or they do a lot of leases, your county chooses to buy rather than lease, it could make a significant difference. So I do see the value for, certain entities. Capital assets, it's again on your Exhibit A and Exhibit B only because it's full accrual. This shows you the changes by classification and lists the depreciation for the fiscal year for each of your functions. And again, if you want to look on page 14 of the MD&A, will give you what were some of those additions that you're seeing under the increase column. And we do the same thing for the Public Safety Commission as well. Note 7, due to other governments, this is just a statutory requirement that we show at the end of each fiscal year what each fund owes to another government and what was the reasoning for that amount being owed. Long-term liabilities, here again is just exhibits A and B. It goes on to show you the fiscal changes in what is construed as long-term debt. So for the county, we list the urban renewal bonds, both in the 17 and 19, and it shows you that you made payments on those, no new debt issuances. In the drainage, it shows you basically issued stamped warrants of $1,472,000, $1,095,000 was paid back, so you have $685,000 in stamped warrants still outstanding as of June 30, 22. Those are your actual debt issuances. Then we get into compensated absences, your net pension liability, which now is an asset, OPEB, which we'll talk about. And then we list the same thing for the compensated absences, the net pension, and the OPEB for public safety as well. Compensated absences stayed relatively the same. The net pension liability, which is your IPERS, it's basically on note 9, and we'll talk about it more. Because it's based a whole year behind, so this is based, so the IPERS valuation is really done on June 30th, 21, not June 30th, 22. Well, the markets were much better then, so it showed that the county, the IPERS as a whole, had extra money there because it was earning some good rates of return, and so therefore you went from a 1,900,000 share of your deficit in IPERS to you actually, your share of the excess on that date was 289,000. So you basically had overfunded the money needed for IPERS. Well, we all know next year it'll be June 30, 22, and the finances weren't quite as good. So I would anticipate we're probably going to go from the 289 asset maybe back to around the $2 million deficit again. So that's just how that could fluctuate. OPEB just went down $18,000, and then you can see the changes for public safety. Then we list by debt issuance what was paid during the year, what fund is making the payments, and what are the payments scheduled to be if you follow the amortization, as well as what options do you have to retire the bonds early. We do that for 17 and 19, your general obligation bonds. We talk about the drainage warrants and how those are issued. Then note 9 is that IPERS pension that we just were explaining about. Again, that only affects your full accrual exhibits A and B. It goes all the way from page 50 to 54, and in this whole section explains IPERS. It talks about the county and commission share of the net pension assets. How were these actual assumptions determined, and that it's based on June 30, 21 figures. So again, this is all the stuff, if you're ever interested in IPERS, there you go. You got some reading material on IPERS. Then on page 54, note 10 goes from 54 to 56. We have to do basically the same actuarial thing. Again, it only affects exhibits A and B for the full county. This is for OPEB. Reminder, what OPEB is nothing more than saying that because as we get older, they feel we become more costly to the health insurance plans, and because Iowa has the statute requirement that if a person retires early, they legally can stay on the county's plan until they get to Medicare age. Therefore, they're saying you're really paying more now to cover those people, even though they're going to pay for it themselves. It's increasing the cost to everybody by having them down the road, so you're recognizing that increase in cost now while they're working. Sounds a little age discriminatory to me, but that's just my opinion. So basically, in the long and short, it's what the actuary thinks you're going to pay extra down the road because of Iowa's statutory requirements. And so it goes on to talk about the actuary and how it comes up with the amounts and the discount rate. Page 56, risk management. It just explains how the county uses ICAP to manage most of its risk that it has, and so it explains ICAP in this section, as well as talks about that you do have workers' comp coverage that you buy elsewhere, and the amount of coverage, and that's in that last paragraph. Then we talk about the employee's partial self-funded health plan. It explains to the reader what your health plan was for the fiscal year, and then what were some of the transactions, what was money collected, what was paid out, and what claims are expected based on the actuary. Development agreements. This lists development agreements the county has entered into with businesses. It basically lists the name of the business. It gives a description of what your agreement with them is, how much was paid to them during fiscal year 21 and 22, and how much have you paid them to date in comparison. So it lists, for instance, BOSMA and how it was transferred to DAP Land Holdings LLC. It talks about the green and yellow, and it talks about how you changed that agreement during the year, so we summarize what's the changes to the agreement that you made with Green and Yellow. It talks about the JRJ Hotel Group, at that time during the fiscal year, Langstrath, Loneman, and Co-op Farmers Elevator. Then we list tax abatements, and it talks about money that's diverted from the county based on urban renewal agreements. Note 15, intergovernment agreement. This just talks about how you're related to the Northwest Iowa landfill as a jointly governed organization. It talks about what does the landfill set aside for post-closure, and it talks about in the last paragraph how you as a county have guaranteed $306,000 in financial insurance if they come up short with their closure when it comes time to closing costs. So basically, it's just explaining to the reader the exposure you have out there with the landfill possibly. Page 60 just talks about during the fiscal year, you were with Care Connections in northern Iowa, and it shows, of course, this was the last year for the mental health, so any remaining balance was transferred out, and so it's basically just meant to show you that. Deficit fund balances, basically, Schedules 1 and 2 list their TIF funds. They are basically because of the fact that you've borrowed money for a TIF project, and now you're waiting for the TIF collections to come in, and you'll pay those debts off as they come. That's the reasoning for the deficit balance. By nature of the TIF, that's just the way it works, and so we recognize that, but we do have to disclose that, and so the reader is aware of it. Commitments just shows what you had in commitments as of June 30, 22 that hadn't quite been fulfilled yet. Estimates just reminds everybody that actual results can differ, because these are based on estimates. The opioid litigation settlement, the county's part of the state of Iowa settlement for the opioid claims. So it basically, they anticipate over the next 17 years, you're going to get money for opioid crisis. And it talks about in that last sentence that it's required to be used for activities to remediate the opioid crisis or treat disorders. And it basically explains to what's coming up in the future and what the money's going to have to be for. As well as, I'm sure Rochelle and the other officials are going to be thrilled about. They just implemented leases. Now the year you just finished up, we're implementing another one with the same concept, and this is subscription-based information technology. So basically, any agreement that you have that extends for over a year, such as like solutions, or maybe some of, in the assessor's office, some of your people who do the mapping and stuff like that. So basically, they're saying you have a commitment to use them for so many years, so we have to basically, you get an asset created for that benefit that's coming, but then you also have to disclose what payments still need to be made in the future to get that benefit. So basically, they're saying, well, we did it for leases, now we're going to try to cover everything else where there's long-term agreements. So basically, everything that extends past a year, past the fiscal year, we're going to have to be analyzing those agreements and doing the same analysis and converting it to its present value as we did for leases. So.
You're talking like the voting equipment that was purchased is over 3 years, that would be included in that?
Well, you own that.
We own it.
Own that. So, but if you had a service agreement, or let's say,
like Premier, we have a 3-year contract.
So that would be one we would have to do. Anybody who have a contract, so if you had a contract, like a maintenance contract to take care of those voting machines for 3 years, that would count. So just keep that in mind and start thinking of what you have. So, all right, then we have your budget to actual. Again, this is done on a cash basis. So we're comparing this from a cash basis, not a modified accrual. We have your first columns, all the county governmental funds. Then we remove drainage because you're not required to budget for drainage to get to what is the net amount that you do budget for in actual terms. Then we list your original budget, what was the original, and then what was the final. And page 14 gives you the reasoning again on your MD&A, how we came from the original to the final. And then we compare the actual county to the final net budget budget, in the last column, so receipts came in $1.7 million better than you had budgeted. Disbursements came in $509,000 below, and none of the functions were exceeded, so you complied with your budget there. And so you came in just under $2.3 million better than you budgeted. And your beginning balance, because you're estimating what that is actually $2.3 million higher than what you had on the budget. So you actually came in $4.6 million higher compared to what your final budget was for the fiscal year on a cash basis. Then on page 65, we again, reconciliation. So we give you a reconciliation from the cash-based budget to the fund accruals on Exhibit E, and give you those changes. And then we do the same analysis for the Public Safety Commission. We have the actual figures, what the adopted budget was, there was no amendments, and then the change. So Public Safety, the receipts came in $38,000 better than budgeted. Disbursements came in $123,000 below budgeted, for a total of $161,500. And so you came in $339,000 better than budgeted. And disbursements for the public safety go by the total, not by program. So the fact that the information tech services was exceeded is no problem. They came in below the total disbursement, so there was no problem with the public safety budget as well. Page 68 just explains to the reader the budgetary process you follow when you set the budget, and the different entities such as the assessors, emergency management, public safety, 911, how they follow statutory similar provisions when they set their budgets. On pages 69 and 70 has first the county and then public safety. This just is a comparison of the net pension asset, liability, and asset. Basically summarizes note 9 and gives you a 8-year comparison of IPERS and the liability calculation or asset. Then on pages 71 and 72, we give you contributions, first county and then public safety. What have you contributed to IPERS for the last 10 years? What is the covered payroll for that, and what's the percentage that makes up of the covered payroll? For that, the last 10-year comparison. As well as on page 74, it just gives you all the different assumptions the actuary used when he did the IPERS calculations for the actuarial report. Then on page 75, like we did the 8-year comparison for IPERS, there's a 5-year comparison for OPEB, and again, note 10 to the financial statements. And then we do the same thing for the Public Safety Commission on page 76. Supplementary information, this is the special revenue funds that weren't deemed to be major. So we list each of those individual funds separately. The total, as we talked about, goes on Exhibit C, and it's included in total. And then you basically, it can show you within by fund how much each are. But we're going to look at the analysis on the next page on 81 and 82 to kind of see how did each one change. So basically, we list your revenues for each of the non-major funds, expenditures, any transfers in or out, which was there's some transfers out. What was the change in fund balance in the ending? So mental health, you close that fund out, so it zeroed it out. The county recorders had a $35 increase, so you're at just under $8,500 there. You have $15 in the public safety unified law, because that pretty much just gets paid to Public Safety Commission, so that's understandable that that's always round to zero. County attorney incentive increased by $3,000 from $8,800 to just under $12,000. Sheriff's asset forfeiture went up $900 to $9,900. The amended ethanol tip area dropped by $3,000. So it dropped down to $30,000 negative. The Senex co-op tip increased by $36,000, so the fund balance went up, but theoretically dropped the deficit down, decreased the deficit to $108,000. Then we get the windmills, that just increased by $1,200 to $1,300. We've got the CFE went up by $73,000, so we dropped that deficit. down to $134,000. The CFE Urban Renewal Area project was closed out during the year, so that money was transferred out to the debt service fund, for which those bonds proceeds are being paid. And then REAP dropped by 900 from 62,000 to 61, so this comes up to where we're coming up with the negative 179,000. So as a whole, these funds increased by $53,000. Then we have, and we're not spending a lot of time on the combining funds, your custodial funds. These are full accrual. This is money you're holding in a fiduciary capacity for instance, the county offices, emergency management, E911, the assessors, your different tax authorities, townships, corporation schools, community college, extension, auto license and use tax, and then like advanced tax collections, and all those sort of funds. So here it gives you what the June 30 balance was in each, and then how did each individual custodial fund change during the fiscal year. It lists what was collected, what was paid out, and then what's the ending fund balance in each of those. And so basically the county, and the custodials as a whole went up $12,900. So you went from $1,011,000 to $1,024,000 in your custodial funds. Then we list, for the Public Safety Commission, we list your balance sheet. So in your public, again, this is on a modified accrual basis. It's on a fund approach, short-term approach. For the Public Safety Commission, again, what's important is the fund balance. They had $34,000 in prepaid expenses. They had $1.1 million unassigned for a total fund balance of just under $1.2 million for their fund balance in public safety. Then we give you a reconciliation, how we go from your modified accrual, Schedule 5, to your Exhibit A in full accrual. And then on page 89, Schedule 7, we go on and show you what was the revenue for the fiscal year for public safety, what were its expenditures, how its fund balance increased by $149,000 from $1,042,000 to that just under $1.2 million. And it gives it to you by program and by classification for that. As well as on page 90, then we give you the reconciliation again from the modified accrual Schedule 7 to the full accrual on Exhibit B for the Public Safety Commission. Then on Schedule 9 and 10, this is meant to give you, for the governmental funds as a whole in the public safety on the next schedule, a 10-year comparison on the modified accrual basis, the short-term approach, and it's basically to just give you an analysis by classification and by function, so you can kind of compare how it's trended over the years, what were some of the significant differences, is there reasonings for it, just an analysis tool for you. Then on page 95, 96, we just go on to talk about internal controls and compliance. We talk about that we use this as an analysis to planning and preparing our audit. However, we're not giving an opinion on internal controls or on compliance. We talk about what is a material weakness that's more likely to maybe affect materially the financial statements versus a significant deficiency, which may affect the financial statements, but it maybe isn't going to reach the level of material discrepancy. We talk about compliance and how we spot test laws, regulations, grant agreements, but it isn't to give you an opinion stating that we looked at everything. And so that's really what this report is for you. Then we get in your schedule findings. A lot of these are similar to they have been in the past, and we've gone over those. So I'm just going to kind of just, we have segregation of duties, we've got inventory records and security over inventory, we've got accounting procedure manuals, information systems, job rotations, collection procedures, usage of county vehicles, equipment documentation, ambulance reconciliations, financial reporting, which is basically doing adjustments of that nature, management procedures, which is comments showing up more than 1 year, We got your payroll issues, the disbursements procedure, which is new, number 12. So basically, and we noted that the auditor's office, in error, they're aware of this, that they accidentally wrote a check out for $45,000 to a vendor. And then, but the vendor did return it, and they caught it, and he caught it and returned it. But we just have to note that that was a sizable amount, and so procedures need to be looked at, so that way that just doesn't happen again. So that's what that is. And then capital asset records, basically like inventory, again, it'd be nice if the different departments would assist the auditor's office more in getting the additions, any deletions from the capital assets records, more on a monthly basis, or, you know, at least an annual, so that way it assists them on keeping current on some of those capital asset changes during the year. As far as statutory, you did not exceed the budget for the year, but because of the fact that you did pay out your Harris TIF, the money owed per the lawsuit, before you adopted your first budget amendment, it did cause the non-program current to exceed it for just a short period of time. So we just have to note that technically, you're supposed to adopt the budget before you exceed it, and they're aware of that. It's just kind of to get that out the door and get that taken care of. So, but as a whole, it was fine. Several disbursements where, you know, need you might have a receipt, but it doesn't give you a breakdown of what was bought, that sort of nature, questionable expenditures. Business transactions, Mega Inc. and Sibling go over the $6,000, so technically, we probably should see that there are bidding requirements for those since they exceed the 6. The Orchid and Crespo with Arlen, because of the fact that, you know, publications technically don't count in that, so when you pull off the publications, it's under the 6, so we do deem to be that fine. Board minutes,
That one, you've encouraged us to use the vendor approval process. How come that's not noted in here as something we've done to address concerns?
So the vendor approval process, you've done that with Simply Sheet and Mega?
I think Boston Water somebody wanted that.
Yeah, so, because you haven't done it for those two. And we're saying the other ones are in compliance. So that's why we didn't note it, because it wasn't, that part of it wasn't in non-compliance. Make sense? Thank you. It's a good question. Then we did note an instance where the assessors review board and conference board, the chairman did not sign the minutes prior to the meeting. Prior meeting minutes, and so we just want to make sure that those get signed every year for that. Deposits and investments, the depository resolution was exceeded for several of the banks, and then we noted that the Melvin Savings Bank never on the resolution never was changed to the Iowa State Bank during the year. So technically, you just got to make sure if banks change, you update it to the correct bank, and then the resolution is set high enough so that you don't exceed it, is what we're referring to there. TIP, we just had just a couple little adjustments that we worked with Chantry on, nothing major there. The treasurer's annual report, we are noting that and that's just more of a solutions thing, but Becky's going to need to work with them. When the treasurer's annual report is being printed out, it's lumping some of the funds together, and I list the funds that it's lumping together, and technically each fund should be listed separately on that treasurer's annual report, so that's something to work with solutions about that. Holding of a check, make sure any checks that are written during the fiscal year are sent out. Don't hold them, even if it isn't due for a month, and we don't want to see it being held. We want to see it actually go out the door, so make sure that that's done. And then financial condition, again, because of the TIF funds, the nature of those TIF funds being at a deficit position, we have to comment, but you do have a plan as you collect TIF funds, they'll be eliminated, so.
Back to the 2022G, where you said minutes weren't signed, and then at times they were, and you cross over the fiscal year mark,
to approve the minutes, so as chair, I didn't feel right signing minutes that hadn't been considered and approved by the board. What do you?
Right. I think these were ones that were the year before that. Because we're always a year behind, so by the time we get here, another meeting had been held. So we're really talking about not the one that just happened, we're talking the one the year before that. Yeah.
Any other questions, comments?
Always, you can contact me at my office. I'm glad to discuss anything with you. If you have any concerns, comments, department officials, if you guys have any questions looking through here, you certainly can contact me as well. Yes, sir.
Is there a better program than QuickBooks that they could be using for the ambulance to reconcile the books over there?
QuickBooks is probably based on Sandy's, what she's good at is probably good. She just needs to do some reconciliations with PCC or PPC? PCC, sorry. But I can look at some other ones too.
I guess, why don't we do the reconciliation somewhere? That's the only question I had.
Okay, good question. But yeah, we can look at some there's different accounting softwares. All of this is with Sandy.
There's gotta be something that's relatively simple, probably similar to QuickBooks, or maybe QuickBooks is something that's, I don't know.
So, there's some couple other ones, but those are more like on a cash basis, and they're not gonna do the receivables, and the biggest thing is monitoring the receivables. That's probably the biggest thing that we wanna see reconciled out, that the receivables on those ambulance, yes, money coming in, going out is accounted for, but then basically, how do those receivables change from year to year? So we just gotta have a program that does receivables well, and it might just be some education here or something like that too.
So for the stuff we're supposed to be keeping track of for inventory records, like what kind of stuff is that?
So for inventory records would be, we just noted like, for instance, perpetual, there's no like perpetual, they're counted like once a year, that sort of thing. More or less.
So like the inventory, like on the ambulance rigs, stuff like that, or?
We're referring to more like secondary road stuff and safeguards, as it's safeguarded, so like is it locked during the night? You can only do so much with gravel piles. That can be done.
We inventory gravel piles, signs, and other types of equipment, go out there, representatives.
Which is just done last week for the new leader.
As far as public safety, I think you and I have talked about this a little bit. Their reserves are probably as much as their whole budget down here. What is a good level, percent level, or is there a rule or a law?
There isn't technically for a public safety commission like that, no, there is no technically rule or law. However, they got 1.19 million and their total expenditures last year are 1.2.
Yeah.
So to me, if you got a year's worth of reserves with no revenue coming in, that probably is healthy. That's very healthy. I don't know that you want to be increasing it more than that by any means. Somewhere between the 75 to 100% is probably a good area to be. That's from an accountant. I'm more conservative, so I like a little, but I guess the taxpayer would disagree with me on that. So, but 75 to 100, they're on the very edge where they don't need to create any more, unless they're foreseeing expenditures going way up for some logical reason. But
Good.
Okay, any other questions, comments?
5 minutes over. Well, thank you for your time. I always appreciate you taking time to visit with me.
I could resist that.
I knew what you meant.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay with this, Dak? Are we gonna do some more thinking, looking? What are we gonna do?
I don't think there's enough information.
What kind of information is right?
Financial information for how much this is gonna be given out, how much it's gonna be assessed for when it's done. I mean, the building's not even up yet, so I don't even know how you come up with that number.
Yeah, read.
And they still got 3 years left, or is it 2? 2 years left on it, so I mean, they got 2 years to get the building up,
Yeah.
and they're still receiving tax rebates up to that point anyway. And that number will change based on whatever the value of the building is for the last 2 years of it.
Okay.
The last year, I think, is the payment will be less because the buildings are off, I believe.
Yeah, it went from, 1.3 down to 443, so, 23.
So it'll be 24, 25, that will be less.
Is there any way to get that information? Well, put it on a future agenda.
We're gonna use the urban renewal process, you're tied to when evaluations hit the books too. They're gonna hit the books next year, and that creates a higher base.
Start
And if
over
we
with
were to
the
start this year. So that process weighs into it as well.
Yeah. So you gonna talk about it next time or not? Put it on the next agenda. Okay, discuss open meeting violation. IPIP. Evidently, we messed up. That happens. So I guess I don't know what the state wants us to discuss other than we don't do it anymore. Because I did ask, because technically this was due last Friday, something like that. And Rochelle and I did email, or I should say Rochelle did. And we did ask for a week's extension.
I never heard back.
Did you?
No, I've not heard back.
I think. Well, we tried. And, I don't know, I guess the only thing we can do is just try to correct it.
Well, I don't think it was an open meetings violation.
And the meeting was adjourned, wasn't it?
Yes, the meeting was adjourned and it wasn't an actionable item for this board. The board had no financial interest in any of that discussion.
Okay.
And it also was not an actionable item on the DCAT board either. It was just a story that I passed along for an alleged investigation by and that's not an actionable item by my board, what the state does with an investigation, or this board.
I know we have a point on the agenda with committee reports. The meeting was adjourned, and then it seemed like a committee report was started to me, so I think it should happen in open meetings. I think it was a violation, and
Well, then you should have made a motion to go back into open session, which you didn't do.
I didn't know what it was about, that the public hadn't been
It
noticed.
wasn't
So
a committee report for my work on that board.
you
That was
seemed,
not my work on that board.
you seemed intent on wanting the Board of Supervisors to know the situation. I think the public should have the opportunity to hear that when you provide that.
They could have had that
information to the board.
opportunity at the previous meeting, at my DCAP meeting as well, because that meeting's open to the public.
I
So
think
there's
we have a serious
ample
disagreement
opportunity,
here.
but you seem to think that by going back and hitting the button, it somehow reactivates the meeting, which it doesn't. If you wanted,
No, I
if you
want the
had an
public to
issue,
have access to it.
meeting was adjourned. If you wanted it to be accessible via that route, in order to not make it in your eyes a violation of open meetings, you needed to reopen the meeting.
I can't reopen a meeting. A meeting is
Yes, you can.
posted
You can
and
make
has
a
a
motion.
time, and it was adjourned.
You can make a motion to reopen the meeting, Jason.
No, I think it should have been done in open session. I think the audio should remain on far more than it does, but that's my opinion.
That's your opinion, but I mean, you make it sound like it was like something that never happened at the meeting, that the camera gets shut off after we adjourn.
I just
Which
soon
it
it didn't.
does.
I just soon it didn't.
Well, that's your opinion. I guess the meeting's over, and if you shut it off, the meeting's
Yeah, so
already
things
adjourned.
can occur, then the public has no record or way to see what has occurred, so I don't think it's a good practice. But
Well, if I file a complaint for every single thing that happened on this board that maybe I thought should have been discussed in open, well, that'd be a lot of complaints, but just so we're all on the same page here, when you file a complaint like this, it's not for one individual board member, it's against the whole board as a whole.
I did not participate because it seemed that the board was going to be apprised of something concerning.
But you still
the board's
participated
interest.
by not
No,
requesting to go
left.
back into open session. No, you were still
I
here
left.
for it. But it still applies to the whole board, no matter whether you attempted to walk out or you went back and hit the button and were gonna stay, or however that works. This complaint is not against the individual on the board, it's against the board as a whole. The only things that come up as individual public information issues that are tied to the individual are open records. And open records, if someone makes a request and you decide not to fulfill it, then that complaint is against the individual. But as far as an open meetings violation, which was filed by the county attorney, I'm guessing on your behalf, because that's how it reads, it applies to the whole board. So whatever ramifications from it are for everybody.
I understand, and I want open meetings. And I think information given to the board members should be done in open session. So when that occurred that day, yes, I told the county attorney about it, and had he not filed, I would have. Because I want our board to be open to the public and have people know when things are going to be
It was an alleged
provided.
incident, Jason. So if you're okay with everybody just spreading rumor, I mean, that's great, but like again, it wasn't an actionable item. And if you look at what open meetings violations are for, it's actionable items that we've discussed after the meeting was over.
Open meeting says that we are to not deliberate. By receiving information
You
from a
weren't
board member, we
deliberating.
have the opportunity to
Jason,
deliberate.
you weren't deliberating
It
on
opens that door
anything.
very quickly. It's not wording, it's not actionable items.
It's nothing you can deliberate on because it's not an actionable item. You have no financial interest in it. All it was a story that was repeated off another board.
I will maintain that I don't think that was the proper way to conduct sharing that information. I did not want to participate and I left, so I will leave it at that. I don't think it should
I guess
continue
next
that way.
time, file your own complaint. If you have such a big issue with something, and you want to file a complaint against the board, including yourself, by all means, go ahead and make a complaint.
My question is, what do we tell the state?
I don't think it was an actionable item, and I don't think it was anything that was an issue to discuss at the end of the meeting. Because it has nothing to do with my work on that board.
We have to tell the state something.
That's a letter that I got sent for some
Was
reason.
this one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I don't have a copy of that.
It was in the folder.
No, I didn't make a copy.
Oh, did you?
I didn't make a copy for you.
Wait a minute, that's one I got, maybe.
That's the one that you had.
Oh, okay.
I just assumed everybody got this letter.
Yeah, yeah, and I didn't.
Nobody got it.
Yeah, Jerry.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Well, that's, I guess her, Facebook page hasn't, chair hasn't changed.
Zoom's dead. So I guess call Brett and see what he wants you to do.
So we'll give him a call in a little bit. Okay, review quarterly reports.
Just tomorrow in the recorder's office.
She has got some catching up to do. Okay, we'll do claims next. We don't need a motion to receive those, do we? And when everybody's looked at the claims, I would take a motion on them.
I looked at it earlier, I'll need that motion.
Okay, we've got a motion, do we have support? Easy.
Yes, yes.
Motion to, or I'll second that motion.
Okay, we've got motion support, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
You all right over there?
I will be, I guess.
Okay. What's it, this one on here?
That's part of the resolution.
Oh. Okay. Let's see, is there anything else for the board?
There's a, meeting tomorrow in Storm Lake for HHS to have some sort of, public forum thing to discuss potentials of consolidating public health, along with the, funding for DCAT and ECI, on how that stuff is handled. They're looking for public input for that, I guess. I don't know that I'd be a fan of consolidating public health down to regional locations, but.
I don't think I would either.
Is that in-person option only, or?
Yep.
Okay.
There's a Zoom option later. They're only doing 3 meetings across the entire state.
Okay, I think I did see that.
And then one Zoom option. So if you guys wanna do the Zoom option or drive to Storm Lake, I guess it's all up to you.
Tell you what, I'll paycheck it to a second doctor's office.
With Vinny? Yeah.
I'm pre-physical, whatever you wanna call it.
You can watch it on Zoom there or something.
Yeah. Anything else for the